Story 1. Dead websites and blogs from the early 2000s, including religious family blogs, small online cults, and especially synchronistic blogs, are still active and continue to appear with a tiny reading audience. I am talking fewer than 200 readers, with 25 to 45 views per post. I love them so much. I would not be who I am today without stumbling upon them early in life. I will share links. However, I will not post links to sites I believe are run by someone vulnerable or that reveal a lot of personal information. I never comment on any of their posts, and I am not sure an influx of attention is good for some of them. Please be respectful of these people and their blogs. I have many more, but this should be enough for now. Story 2. Anthroponymy is the study of the history and etymology of human names. There is the subreddit Name Nerds and other online communities, but most participants are either looking to name a child, a pet, or a fictional character, or they enjoy suggesting names for others. I focus on in-depth research into the etymology and history of names, which is rare even online. I have never met anyone with the same interest in real life. I can give the etymology of most names common in the Western world from memory. This is, unfortunately, not a particularly useful skill. Story 3. I train crows. They are very smart and now protect my house and bring me gifts. It sometimes looks like the Addams Family mansion. For people asking how to start, see the Reddit communities Crows and Crowbro. I already had crows on my property. Story 4. This is a fun thread original poster. Mine is definitely food history. It all started when I stumbled across a Helen Corbett cookbook in an antique store almost a decade ago. From there, I got into old cookbooks, then into very old cookbooks, for example Apicius, which I now own multiple printings of. This started before Max Miller was active, back when Townsends were virtually the only people making food-themed historical content. Even now, food history is incredibly niche, and I have never met anyone else who collects cookbooks for their historical value. Some of the books I have found are rare. Some are reprints of very old texts that were originally used for anthropological research. I have a whole book on the history of ketchup. In my experience, most people who are into food history are amateur historians who care more about the history than the food, which is a problem for someone like me who only became interested in the history because of the food. So I mostly keep to myself about it. Edited to add. I am delighted by the responses I am receiving here and grateful for all the recommendations. If I have not replied to you, I apologize. I probably will not have an opportunity to do so for at least another 24 hours. Story 5. I make coins using medieval techniques. Not the Renaissance fair drop press, but well-researched medieval methods. I make my own tools. I taught myself hand engraving to cut my own dies. I make blanks from an ingot of silver and strike the coins with a hammer. I read books about medieval coin making, coin makers, and money. The mass fabrication by hand, without modern conveniences, of such precise metal pieces fascinates me, especially now as physical money declines in everyday life. I probably think about it entirely too much. Others are interested in hearing about it, but few want to share the hobby. Story 6. Every spring I run through the woods to collect moose antlers they shed over the winter. I probably cover 200 to 300 miles in the woods over a 2 to 3 month period. Story 7. Using a sling to hit targets blows my mind because such a simple weapon is so powerful and fun to use. To be clear, I mean a sling, not a slingshot. Story 8. Masonry work. I have done various tasks as part of a garden renovation, mostly laying pavers and dry-setting stone walls. I recently installed a herringbone pattern of pavers in a small area in front of the house. I also laid a brick garden border that is perfectly straight along the entire property line. Next spring, I will build a small brick retaining wall and assemble a stacked stone garden border. I would have done that already but could not get to it before the weather turned. Now I have a pile of stone behind the garage that my wife is patiently ignoring. Edit. Thanks for the large turnout. I will try to answer questions that some of you had. Why did you start doing this? The previous owner abandoned many building supplies, including a large pallet of bricks. I figured it would be cheaper to use them rather than rent a dumpster. How did you learn? I created a paved surface under a structure on the property so people could not easily see my beginner work. After many hours, I became skilled enough to make better choices and fix problems. That meant getting more tools and using other skills, such as setting string lines and using an angle grinder to shape bricks. I watched many videos. I progressed to other projects. Working with cobblestones, creating garden borders, making steps from old bluestone sidewalk slabs, and installing a herringbone brick area in my front walk. There is a brisk trade in salvaged masonry materials on Facebook. I have never had to pay for a brick. I did pay $50 for some cobbles that exactly matched ones already in the yard. What videos? I started with beginner masonry introductions. I also used more thorough European method videos, garden border techniques that show using a string line to match slope, instructions on how to tie a string line, small-scale step construction, herringbone brick technique, and cobblestone methods. Some videos assume a very flat yard. I needed to use a string line to match the slope in my yard instead of relying on a level. Can we see photos? If I can find a way to hide my house, I will post some. Can you work on my project? I am producing apprentice-level work. It is passable, but it takes me longer than a professional and I am still learning as I go. Story 9. These are old 1970s 7-inch jukebox records known as little long-playing records. They are like mini versions of a full album, usually with 5 or 6 songs. I enjoy many genres, but I especially like the rock ones, for example the Rolling Stones, Led Zeppelin, Jethro Tull, Black Sabbath, and others. They are hard to find, but I enjoy the challenge. I have not met anyone else who shares my interest. From an online post, I was able to acquire several more from a fellow Reddit user to add to the collection. Story 10. Radiation fascinates me. I do not know how to explain it. It is far from my profession, although my work has a small intersection with physics. I love everything about the topic of radiation. Story 11. Folklore reveals much about cultures when we study it. Furthermore, the way folklore is passed down through generations can provide glimpses of past events beyond written records. Symbolism is another passion of mine. I often hear people dismiss it as not that deep, which I find disappointing. Story 12. I really like my job. I am a serologist, also known as a blood banker, at an immunohematology reference laboratory. My husband listens as I describe the unusual cases I see at work. Most people do not even know there are blood groups beyond A, B, AB, and O, or that a person can form antibodies to these blood group antigens, which can cause life-threatening transfusion reactions. Story 13. Dinosaurs. I think people's general perception has shifted enough that it is not weird to like them. I definitely feel judged by some, as if being interested in the fact that before mammals there were massive giants that roamed the earth and later died out is something only children should get excited about. Story 14. The United States Emergency Alert System has fascinated me since childhood. I am intrigued by how the alerts are encoded, the protocols when certain event codes are used instead of others, and so on. Simulated alerts on YouTube are especially compelling. Some are extremely effective as a storytelling medium. Story 15. There is a subreddit devoted to collecting the plastic bread tabs that come on bread bags to keep them closed. Story 16. Let me preface this by saying I am a sociologist. I began my dissertation on marriage and the social shift to cohabitation, and on how marriage has become primarily an institution of the middle and upper classes. As the middle class shrinks, we are seeing more people in lower socioeconomic groups living alone despite being in long-term committed relationships, while the middle class increasingly cohabitates. It is truly fascinating. Story 17. Growing fungus. Mycology. Friends are not interested, but they become interested in procuring the final product. Story 18. Hunting without killing anything. It is about sitting in a deer blind for hours, being still and quiet, listening to the wind in the trees, hearing the leaves rustle, watching the birds and squirrels, and hoping a herd of deer comes to feed so you can watch them move silently and gracefully. I absorb the peace as the sky fades from blue to orange to purple and then to black. I tried calling myself a photographer, but even taking a photo breaks the spell. Now I am just a guy who likes to sit in the woods and does not tell anyone. Story 19. Mass extinctions. Specifically, how biodiversity can recover afterward, becoming completely unrecognizable but still thriving. Story 20. When I try to explain cryptic crosswords to people, I see their eyes roll back. Story 21. Based on the research I have done, they were established immediately after the Black Death and were common from then on until the advent of the automobile. Story 22. The functioning of the Enigma encoder. I even created the encoder wheels in computer-aided design and began making some of the parts to try to reproduce them using materials as close to the originals as I could reasonably achieve. I used three-dimensional resin instead of bakelite. Story 23. I collect fountain pens. We are few and far between in real life. Story 24. Jigsaw puzzles. I own hundreds of them, and no one understands why I love them so much. They think they are boring. To me, nothing is more relaxing than working a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle while watching either horror movies or true crime documentaries. Story 25. Tornadoes. Weather. Unidentified flying objects. Ghosts and the paranormal. I love a good cryptid story. Story 26. Local history, especially pre-Columbian earthworks, mounds, and trails. There are a few dozen Smithsonian catalog sites scattered around my county and plenty more that are not. I'm not that into it anymore, and cultural sensitivities have changed a great deal since my youth. Things that were common knowledge in my area stopped being talked about and may be completely forgotten within a generation or two. There are remains of a partially excavated mound enclosure that I could see through the window during my last dental cleaning. I mentioned it to the hygienist, who reacted as if I were inventing a wild conspiracy about something being out back. It's a shame. There is a lot of history in my area that goes back to the last ice age. Story 27. Playing House Flipper, a video game about building houses and doing interior decorating. I have probably spent over 2,000 hours playing it in the past 3 years. My coworker has no idea what I mean or why I talk about it. Story 28. I love collecting knives. People think I'm a weirdo, but one day I'd like to build a collection of non-kitchen, collectible knives. I live in a country with strict laws regarding weapons, so that may not be possible here. Story 29. Immunotherapy. The idea that you can engineer your own immune cells to treat almost anything still amazes me after 20 years. Story 30. The First World War. I am a girl, too. I have been especially alone in this interest my whole life. None of my female friends have shown curiosity in it, and men, in my experience, have been cliquish or have brushed me off entirely. It has been a lonely love. Story 31. Written witness accounts describe the bubonic plague, plague pits, and quack medical cures used in the 1400s. Small villages that were wiped out and later disappeared are still being discovered. Story 32. Television ratings. The little television parental guidance suggested, television parents strongly cautioned, and television mature audiences only labels on a show. I have been obsessed with them since I was 8 years old, but outside of certain conversations, such as World Wrestling Entertainment being rated parental guidance, no one really talks about them. Story 33. Latte art. There are hours of online videos to watch. It is easy to start but difficult to master. Story 34. Clowning. For as long as I can remember, I have wanted to be a party clown. I have never met anyone with the same interest. I love going to the circus, but the clowns are usually elderly people who are simply dressed up, not actually clowning. The younger generation must step up and carry the torch. Come on, you guys. Story 35. Vermiculture. Yes, it is an odd hobby, but my garden loves it. Story 36. Towers, specifically transmission towers, have fascinated me since I was young. Story 37. Lou Cruzit. I know many people are into it, but no one I know personally is. I had 3 tickets to the FTT event. 1 ticket went unused, and I had to beg someone to use the other. Story 38. Embroidery is one of my favorite crafts and pastimes for making gifts. Story 39. The incredibly toxic relationship between King Edward II and his second favorite, Hugh Despencer, is striking. Imagine being so obsessed with a supposedly platonic male companion that you are deposed and murdered. Imagine meeting this famously awful man, hated by almost everyone who meets him, watching him beat someone in the aisle of a cathedral, and thinking that he is the person you want to risk your life for, someone worth potentially bringing down the monarchy. I am obsessed. Story 40. Genetic origins research is the study of ancient human remains and how people in the ancient world migrated to different parts of the earth. Story 41. Heating, ventilation, and air conditioning measures can improve energy efficiency by operating systems correctly or by automating them. Story 42. Native plants, in my case those in northern Illinois and southern Wisconsin. Story 43. The history of religion and the Bronze Age. How beliefs across the Fertile Crescent and the Mediterranean interact. For example, there is some circumstantial evidence that the Gorgon Medusa is a telephone game version of Gilgamesh and Humbaba. Story 44. Weather. I have watched nearly every tornado video on YouTube. When I could not find new ones, I started watching college-level courses about how weather works. I know how to read radar, and I will be taking a class in January to become a registered storm spotter. One of my best moments was telling my parents to prepare the storm shelter under the stairs. They did not take me seriously, but less than 5 minutes later the tornado sirens sounded and they jumped into action. Story 45. I enjoy collecting miniature perfumes and learning about fragrances in general. My teenage son is learning with me, but everyone else is pretty indifferent and has 2 or 3 bottles they have used for years. Story 46. Eating disorders are my specialty. I am a specialist psychologist who treats eating disorders and find them endlessly fascinating. The disorder itself is uniquely complex in how it develops and is sustained. People with eating disorders are incredibly strong to live with this condition and to fight it every day, especially during early weight restoration and anorexia. Beyond that, the deep psychological processes involved, such as control, identity, fear of change, and existential dread, are struggles many people face. That these processes become channeled into eating disorders is intriguing. I am also interested in the gendered aspect, why women tend to control the body to such extremes. I completed a Doctor of Philosophy degree on the topic. However, this subject often makes people uncomfortable at parties or prompts them to share their own experiences. So I usually talk about my other fascination, Tolkien. Story 47. My newest obsession has been net making, not an information technology net, but a fishing net. It started as a way to keep my hands busy in bad weather while I was outside smoking and has evolved into a fascination with the history of the practice and the tools. I think people often underestimate the time and skill required to survive from the water as a resource in our history. Modern tooling and mass-produced products prevent us from knowing our ancestors' skills and everyday knowledge. The cast net I am making currently has nearly 1 kilometer of line and is about 4 feet deep with an 8-foot spread when thrown. Most people would guess it has only a few hundred meters. From this I learned that our ancestors not only tied thousands of knots but also produced many kilometers of line to create even a moderate gill net or seine. I can't imagine hand reverse twisting a couple of kilometers of jute bark or cattail fibers to make a strong, thin line, then spending countless more days tying it. This shows how valuable the nets were and how valuable the people with the skills to make them were. More than anything, it has inspired me to learn and pass on some of these ancient skills. I can't see a downside to understanding how to use natural or recycled materials to produce tools that are still relevant today. We just aren't as dependent on them. Story 48. I am not extremely niche, but I collect words such as unusual surnames, place names, street names, and so on. I love etymology, linguistics, history, and genealogy. This side hobby sits at the crossroads of all of them. Story 49. Pool billiards. I've played for 24 hours straight on several occasions, but everyone I know has no interest. There was a lot of advice to join a league. I've played in American Pool Players Association and Billiard Congress of America leagues. There is a lot of standing around in those leagues. You can be there 4 to 5 hours and play one match, sometimes not at all, mostly against casual players. They are great if your goal is to drink and chat all night, but not if you are looking for high-level competitive play on quality tables. Story 50. I'm obsessed with fish. There are people around me who share my interests because I work in the environmental field, but outside of work, almost everything my friends and family know about fish or fishing came from me. Ever since I was a kid, I have chased minnows up and down the beach and fished as much as I could. That initial curiosity turned into an obsession. I wanted to know everything about them, what they eat, how they behave, what habitats they prefer, and any other quirks of a species. Ask me a question about fish or anything in the outdoors, and I will talk for an hour before realizing I have taken over the conversation. I am graduating from university and about to start the career I have always dreamed of. Everyone around me loves how passionate I am, and it honestly feels like I am winning at life. Story 51. Acid breaks is a niche subgenre of rave and electronic dance music, characterized by tracks built around a syncopated breakbeat and bass lines from the Roland TB-303 synthesizer. I have spent years mapping its origins, significant cultural moments, and its impact over the past 35 years. I currently have 150 pages of material and am trying to decide what to do with it because it may be too niche. Story 52. I could talk for hours about my love for obscure board games. Story 53. I am increasing my average sleep per night. I am 61. A year ago, I slept 6 hours per night on average. Over the last year, I increased that to 6.5 hours. This past week, I averaged 7 hours, and I am working on maintaining 7 hours per night. Story 54. Russian history and life under communism. I have been reading about it intermittently for about 20 years. I am obsessed. Even when I read other topics or books, I gravitate back to it. Story 55. I am obsessed with collecting ficus trees, specifically the species that become banyan trees rather than those that produce edible fruit. I grow every available variety in my house and backyard. I live in Florida and love to take cuttings from the ficus trees I see when I visit South Florida, where they grow wild and are considered invasive. Story 56. I'm taking roller skating lessons, and it confounds me that my friends in their 30s and 40s do not want to go. Story 57. I am obsessed with collecting religious items, such as crucifixes and ornaments of Mary and Jesus, but I am not religious at all. Story 58. I am learning everything I can about any rare disease I come across. I have absolutely no interest in biomedical research or medicine. I want just the facts about diseases. Story 59. Creatures that are misunderstood or feared. I love to observe and interact with wasps, snakes, spiders, rodents, and others. Most living things respond well to respect and curiosity, and this is a way to find a natural connection anywhere in the world. Story 60. Cast iron pans. I collect them and restore rusty, damaged pieces. I feel like this is a hobby more typical of a 70-year-old man, but I am a 29-year-old woman. I love figuring out the history and which decade each pan was made. My husband made me a rack so I can hang them all in the kitchen. If I have too many of one size, I give extras to friends and family. They feel more meaningful than a new lodge piece. Story 61. It took me more than 30 years to get over my phobia, and now I have my first snake. Some people have made rude comments about him, but I think he is a beautiful, precious baby. Story 62. Pads. My wife thinks I am mental, but it is very important to have the right type of pad for the purpose. Edit. Stationary, you dirty bastards. Story 63. For me, it is arm wrestling. Almost everyone I know in real life does not even view it as a sport. Laughing out loud. Story 64. I love bridges and am fascinated by them. I will go out of my way when traveling to see a particularly interesting one. On my first trip to Maine, my wife patiently indulged an hour-long detour so I could see the Bailey Island Bridge, the only granite cribstone bridge in the world. It was so worth it. Story 65. I'm a taphophile, particularly fond of macabre artwork found on gravestones from the 1600s to the early 1800s. I travel the world exploring graveyards and churches, though I'm not religious. I enjoy the imagery that urged people to pray, repent, and fear hell, and I appreciate the more accepting attitude toward death in the past. Story 66. Specialty coffee. Pour over and AeroPress for the most part. I am lucky to have converted my parents, but no one uses a gram scale, laughing out loud. Runners up. Tires and drone metal. Story 67. I love carabiners. I also enjoy obsessively upcycling and making shoddy items from old materials. Story 68. Good question, original poster. Jerome David Salinger has not been widely written about recently, as his last work was published in 1965. He reportedly left unpublished writings in a vault when he died in 2010. However, nothing has been released so far. Story 69. I love science journalism. I read breaking stories about every branch of science. I have never met anyone who shares my interest in the latest updates on Spinosaurus anatomy, the most distant singularity from Earth, or advances in cold fusion. Sometimes my husband asks what I am reading. When I tell him, he is silent for a moment and then responds with news about music or a new cybersecurity exploit, and then it is my turn to be quiet. Story 70. Hamilton the Musical. I am Indian, so it is very niche here. Story 71. Disc Golf. My family doesn't understand why I keep buying new discs. Story 72. I was obsessed with finding Mini Cooper snow globes for a few years before I finally got the two I was missing. I can't explain why, and no one ever understood. Story 73. Lichens are an amazing partnership between a fungus and either a cyanobacterium or an alga. The fungus provides protection and structure while the other partner performs photosynthesis to make food. Lichens are found in almost every habitat and serve as food for several animals. They also break down rock, turning it into soil. Plus, they look cool. Some look like paint splotches and others are plant-like. They come in all sorts of colors: green, yellow, rust, and black. I hike for fun, and I also hike to take photos of lichens. They genuinely make me happy knowing that two completely different forms of life are in a symbiotic partnership. I could talk about this all day. Story 74. Brain science, especially in the realm of mental health, is fascinating. Rewiring the brain after trauma or to overcome bad habits is particularly interesting to me. Story 75. Names. The fancy word for it is onomastics. Puritans in the 1600s gave their children some truly unusual names because they believed names should remind people to live morally. Alongside simple biblical names like John and Mary, they used long sentence names such as Fear the Lord and Fight the Good Fight of Faith. Some names were meant to warn children, such as if Jesus Christ had not died for thee, thou hadst been damned, which is an actual recorded Puritan name. I am very interested in how, throughout history and in some modern societies, people give their children gross-sounding names such as dog's hit, slave, garbage, worthless, and unloved. They do this with the belief that the name will protect the child from evil spirits or demons, who will be tricked into believing that the child is not worth stealing or harming. Story 76. I developed an interest in pain after living with chronic pain and gaining more medical education. The physiological mechanisms behind pain, especially chronic pain, are incredibly complex and fascinating. I am deeply interested in how trauma impacts the body and the connection between body and mind, which, in my opinion, are not two distinct things but are deeply interwoven. Neuroplasticity is also fascinating. Although there is a lot of information on these subjects, much remains unknown. Story 77. I collect weird old safety manuals from factories and labs. The niche lore is how absolutely unhinged some of the illustrations are. There is one where the lesson is basically do not sword fight with radioactive rods. I cannot unsee it. Story 78. Chess. I'm always open to a game, but no one I know actually plays chess. Story 79. I love weird and obscure things. It does not matter what they are, but my favorites are movies and video games. The weirder and more obscure, the better. It brings me joy to show people things that nobody has heard of before. The only issue is that they are obviously hard to find. Laughing out loud. Story 80. Racquetball is a sport that is nearly unknown outside a small group of enthusiasts. There is still a professional tour. The top player in the world, Kane Waislenchuk, went 3 years without losing a match and is an incredible athlete, though few have heard of him beyond the racquetball community. Racquetball is a fun, fast-paced sport, but it is not beginner-friendly like pickleball or television-friendly like tennis. It is a shame because it provides great exercise and is fun to play. Story 81. There are many early 1900s to 1930s Victorian and craftsman homes scattered throughout the suburbs and commercial areas of my city. I love spotting houses converted into businesses while driving. Often a pitched roof remains in the middle, surrounded by the flat roofs many businesses use. Seeing one makes me want to go inside to see how much of the original house remains or whether only the roof is original. My partner agrees it is my most niche hobby. It piggybacks on my love of craftsman homes since I grew up in one. Story 82. I love foreign period piece dramas. I'm in the United States and especially enjoy ones from Germany, Spain, Russia, the United Kingdom, Italy, and France. Most people focus on British period dramas, which I enjoy too, but many excellent ones from other countries don't get enough recognition. Story 83. I design panel shapes for spherical juggling beanbags, also known as footbags or hacky sacks. I provide sewing patterns and write a technical treatise and instructional guides on the subject. I started the hobby in the mid-1990s. I have published the third edition, and my documents total over 750 pages. They are available as a free download. I have a few fans on the internet, especially Hallie, but nobody I know personally is interested or has read my documents. There is a Reddit post and a home-built website with download links and a forum. Story 84. Knife sharpening. I could talk for hours about the intricacies of sharpening a knife. What steel is the knife made of? Which stones are best? Arkansas stones, diamond stones, or resin-bonded diamond stones? I tell everyone I will sharpen their knives for free because I enjoy it. I have a large knife collection and keep the blades razor sharp. In fact, I probably over-sharpen them. Only a couple of people take me up on the offer. I have probably invested $1,000 in sharpening tools. I started making knives, which I enjoy, but sharpening is where it is for me. Story 85. I'm weirdly obsessed with old sewing machines, like the heavy metal ones your grandma hid in a closet. Nobody in my life understands why I get so excited when I find a new model. Story 86. I study prehistory, specifically human evolution. My wife jokes that I'm working on a graduate degree without going to graduate school, and she is not wrong. It is wild that thousands upon thousands of years of human lives, extending back before Homo sapiens, can only be glimpsed through archaeology. I spend a lot of time feeling sad about how much was lost in North America after European colonization, at least in terms of the archaeological record, before considering the human cost. I also feel like I am playing intellectual dodgeball trying to avoid baseless or debunked conspiracy theories about prehistory. Story 87. I collect photos of doors. I have an Instagram account with some of my favorites. I sometimes do watercolor paintings of buildings that feature doors with a whimsical charm. I have always been fascinated by interesting doors. They make me wonder what kind of eccentric person might live behind them. When I walk around my city, I take photos of any doors that spark my curiosity. When I travel, I sometimes collect hundreds of door photos. The doors of each country tell a unique story. Much can be read in their materials, wood carvings, scale, colors, patterns, and ironwork. Some of my favorite doors have been in Porto, Lisbon, Penang, Merida, Tulum, and Phuket. Story 88. Shamanic drumming. There is a reason cultures have practiced it around the world. We have a backward notion that our ancestors were more primitive than we are. In fact, we have lost our connection to everything around us, including the natural world inhabited by spirits. Story 89. I love having deep conversations. We can have a serious discussion about why we believe certain things, then randomly make a joke and return to questioning existence. I appreciate being able to talk about our opinions without feeling judged. Story 90. I enjoy learning about the history of stringed instruments and songs from centuries past. I even have a YouTube channel where I perform those pieces and discuss their history. Story 91. Exposing the boom in predatory franchise sales scams, especially those targeting veterans and military families. I could explain further, but you likely do not care. Story 92. I like to visit random countries using Google Maps Street View and walk around until I find a street dog. Story 93. I have a collection of late 19th century housekeeping books. In England, the Industrial Revolution enabled many young women to move from the lower class to the middle class by marrying industrialists with money. Some went from living in a single room in a tenement to living in a multi-story house where they were expected to employ a couple of servants. They had no idea what to do and no one to ask. Writers such as Mrs. Beaton were there to help. The books provide recipes, but that is only a small part. They also list furniture and kitchen equipment to keep on hand and explain how to select and hire servants. They offer a detailed view of that world. Some volumes even name specific London retailers recommended by the author. Fascinating. Story 94. I love looking at maps. I'm not an expert, but maps are just really cool. World, game, space, and fantasy maps. Give me a map and I'll study it for hours. I have 2 bookmarks in Firefox for Google Maps, one local and one global, because I always need quick access. If someone gives an address in a television show or movie, I look it up to see if it is real and whether they filmed at that location. If you give me a zone improvement plan code, I'll tell you the state it is in. Story 95. Putting things together could literally be anything. Lego bricks, a computer, a car, or construction. I don't know why, but I can imagine a really cool design or how something fits together. And if I learn to do it, it becomes oddly easy for me. Sadly, no one takes me seriously. As soon as I tell them I have a cool idea for a bathroom layout, or explain how something goes together while they work on their vehicle, they lose interest, pretend to listen, or do not care at all. Story 96. I collect handmade bears, which is quite a niche hobby where I live. I don't know anyone else here who does it. Story 97. I am autistic and the vast majority of my interests are somewhat niche, but I will describe my most niche one. My secondary special interest is in Kindai and independent children's music. Yes, I am 20 years old. For background, I have always been known for having childlike interests or for never really growing out of things. I always enjoyed what I heard as a child when it comes to traditional songs, but I did not get into this music properly until a random night in late 2020. I was thinking back to when I had a Nabi Junior tablet at age 7 and came across the preloaded Laurie Berkner albums in the music app. At first I felt a bit embarrassed that I enjoyed the song I played and I turned it off, but I became curious and decided to find it again. It took a little time because I could not remember her name, but after researching those tablets I found the band name and pulled up the music once I remembered the song. I genuinely enjoyed it and no longer felt weird about it, so I checked out the rest of the album and from that point on it was history. I have now collected more than 60 compact discs from dozens of artists, and I have heard some really excellent music. I have heard some bad stuff too. But I think many people would be surprised to learn that children's music is not just nursery rhymes and that parents do not have to suffer to play kid-friendly songs for their children. Why do I enjoy it so much? Its wholesome and silly nature appeals to me. No one I know likes it, and I have not found anyone online who likes it as much as I do, aside from fans of Disney and soundtracks. Unlike my other interests, I have no one to talk with about this. That is a shame, but it is also convenient because I do not have to spend a lot of money to collect my favorite albums physically, unlike collectors of certain mainstream albums. Story 98. Viking culture and Norway have fascinated me. I have been learning about them and planning a trip for over a year. I have been listening to the music, making the food, and watching live webcams daily. It will be my next big trip. Story 99. Photons. It is becoming apparent to me that they are extremely important to the universe. Story 100. One day, lying in bed and letting my thoughts run like a freight train on a loose track, I realized I didn't like opera. My next thought was, how do you know you don't like it? Have you ever really tried it? Do you know anything about it besides the Bugs Bunny line, "Kill the Wabbit"? So, like my adventures in golf, I did a deep dive into opera, starting with Carmen. I read about opera and the male and female Fox systems for singers, studied the arias, overtures, and stories, read the novel Carmen was based on, listened to lectures, and listened to many performances, especially Carmen. I finally watched Carmen, and unlike golf, which I appreciate technically but dislike, I found I really liked opera. No one appreciates this hobby. I rarely talk about it because no one gets it. I did the same deep dive with hip-hop and rap after an initial EW, I don't like it reaction. My first response to anything I think I don't like is, how do you know? If it's a superficial judgment, I tried it once. I go all in and study it to see whether I truly dislike it or whether it's just unfamiliar. That's how I know I hate natto but like seared tuna. Story 101. the exact temperature and humidity at which a 1980s cathode ray tube monitor stops rolling and the picture locks in perfectly. I own 7 monitors, professional video monitors, and broadcast video monitors, and I will happily spend 45 minutes with a hygrometer and a space heater tweaking a room until a Sony Trinitron from 1987 finally stops rolling and gives me rock-solid 240p resolution. I have spreadsheets. I know my 20L5 prefers 21 degrees Celsius and 42% relative humidity like it is a diva that needs its dressing room at exactly 69 degrees Fahrenheit. My friends think I am insane. My girlfriend left the room the last time I said, just 8 degrees Celsius more and the geometry will be perfect. I have whispered, thank you baby, to a 30-year-old television when it finally stopped the faint hum and the scan lines lined up like soldiers. I am not saying I have a problem. I am saying I have a $400 thermometer and a Google document titled Monitor Environmental Settings. Story 102. Black metal is often seen as performers in goth face paint and armor, but it is one of the most experimental, complex, and atmospheric genres of music. I know people who have dedicated their lives to black metal. I find a new favorite band every week, and there are very few people I can talk to about it. Story 103. I pick up litter in my city. I never imagined that I would be able to regularly read posts online that are specifically about something I have been doing alone since 1985 in the Reddit community called Detrashed. Story 104. I became obsessed with nail polish after the last presidential election. I'm not sure what the connection was, but the nail lacquer community on Reddit is politically progressive, which encouraged me. I watch nail videos, collect nail polish, and paint my nails frequently. I don't have a social media account documenting my nail journey, so only a few friends know about it in real life and no one else shares the same interest. Story 105. Finger skateboarding like tech deck toys but with professional equipment that could cost nearly as much as a regular skateboard. Story 106. Etymology and language reveal the history behind the words we use. I love finding connections among languages and cultures and understanding why we communicate the way we do. I find it fascinating. Story 107. Prehistoric humans, races, civilizations, wars, and architecture. By prehistoric, I mean as far back as humans go: Homo erectus, Homo heidelbergensis, Homo neanderthalensis, and Homo sapiens. Story 108. I like genealogy because I love solving puzzles using deoxyribonucleic acid. I found my great-grandmother's birth parents. It took as much time as earning a master's degree, but I managed it. I still enjoy finding mysteries in my deoxyribonucleic acid matches and poking around until I figure them out. I do not tell anyone because people do not want to hear about genealogy. Their eyes glaze over. It sounds like a hobby for someone who is obsessed with pedigree or with being related to George Washington. Story 109. Military aircraft. If I hear one, I run outside to spot and identify it. It does not matter where I am or what I am doing. I am as fast as lightning. When I return, I am either gleaming with excitement or clearly disappointed because I missed it, while everyone else carries on as usual. It is not that niche, but I have had this interest my whole life. Story 110. I have always been a Civil War and World War II buff, even as a kid, but Ken Burns' documentaries sparked my interest in the Vietnam War about 10 years ago. Having a father born in 1950 also made me want to understand his life a little more, because he was always somewhat closed off. Story 111. Hemochromatosis is a genetic medical condition that many people, including some doctors, do not know about unless they know someone affected. Families may be unaware because the symptoms mimic other, more common conditions. If detected early, it is easily managed. A late diagnosis can cause debilitating symptoms and irreversible liver damage, among other problems. Without diagnosis and treatment, iron overload can lead to liver cirrhosis, liver and other organ cancers, and heart complications. These outcomes can often be avoided by testing iron levels. Iron is not always the body's friend. Story 112. Whales. It is out of control. I know as much as professional whale researchers because I read every piece of research about whales. I have a special interest in humpbacks, orcas, and sperm whales. People avoid asking me about them because I could talk for hours. Story 113. I collect physical media. I do not know anyone outside the internet who does. My nephew has shown interest, but he tends to drop things after a couple of months, so I am not trying to indoctrinate him. When I acquire a new item and people I know see it, they shake their heads and ask why I do this when streaming is available. I explain my reasons, but they do not care. I do not like being lectured about my collection by people who buy things I do not enjoy. I do not rant at people for drinking alcohol, eating out, or paying for streaming services. I buy my movies and music and get to keep them forever. I win. Story 114 Video Game Box Art Design. The games themselves are cool, but I'm often more interested in the small details of box art than in the games. The only other person I know who feels this way is Scott the Woz, and he talks about it as if he does not know anyone else who cares. Story 115. I collect very old books. My favorites are old poetry, books with weird covers or intriguing titles, and books on very specific topics. One of my favorite poetry books is a little over 100 years old, and the poems are still relatable. I took it out yesterday to copy some poems for Christmas cards. I also have a book with a horse, a ladybug, a rocket ship, Saturn, and palm trees all on the front cover. The spine reveals the book is about dogs, of course. It's a bonus when books contain writing from past owners. Story 116. I skate on quad skates, not inline skates or rollerblades. I do jam skating and street and trail skating instead of circling a rink. Thanks to social media and meetup groups, I have found my people since moving to a new state. It no longer feels so niche, although quad skaters are still spread out. None of my non-skating friends would want to skate or listen to me nerd out about skate anatomy and moves. I just got back on my skates after 2.5 months recovering from an avoidable broken ankle. Story 117. I mostly listen to obscure music artists. I also like popular ones, but some of my favorites are obscure or no-hit wonders. Story 118. I review queer romance books. I am a suburban heterosexual mother and dentist, so most of my friends who discuss these books are online. Story 119. Art Deco and mid-century furniture restoration and taxidermy. Story 120. I build custom bicycle frames and make custom-fit bicycles. It is a deep, torrid rabbit hole full of extremely particular personalities. Story 121. I have been fascinated by virtual reality since I first experienced it in 1995. I have friends who own virtual reality headsets but use them only occasionally. Some people I have known for about 20 years, and I engage them in virtual reality apps or games about once a year. Story 122. I have an entire suitcase of scrapbooking materials, supplies, and tools. Story 123. I don't think language learning is too niche, but I can only meet people online who are interested in it, never in real life. Story 124. I was in dental school when the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic began. I have a small collection of teeth, all fake except for a chip from one. It includes molds of my teeth and a few friends' teeth, dentures, models, flashcards, and several books on dentistry. I find them fascinating. Most people find it creepy and do not understand. Story 125. I absolutely love fiber art and textile history. I think it is so fascinating how we went from having to grow materials, spin our own yarn, and weave and sew our own clothes to the fast fashion industry we have today. We used to spend so many hours just clothing ourselves. Everyone knew how to spin, even men, and would put in the work to clothe their family. One way archaeologists distinguish a fort from a town is the discovery of spindles, which indicates that women lived there and were spinning and weaving for their families. It could take almost 200 hours of work or more just to spin enough yarn for a family of 4. That does not include the weaving or sewing of clothes. Fabric used to be the basis of many things in society. When coins and paper money were unreliable, many ancient societies used fabric as a form of currency because it was so valuable. Loans were sometimes secured with fabric. I want to learn how to spin yarn, weave, and do all parts of fiber crafts. Right now, I am working on improving my knitting skills. I can crochet a little, but I want to learn it all. The dream is to go from a fleece to a finished garment. I am passionate about historical fashion and want to make my own historical garments. I am also fond of sheep, especially heritage breeds, because their wool can have unique properties and because the animals themselves look distinctive. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.